Good morning, everyone, and I want to thank you all for being here with me today. I have the distinct honor and pleasure of interviewing a national author who is also my lifelong friend, Mr. Elliot Mason, who is the author of two amazing books, The Arlington Orders, great book, and The Legal Killer. And we're going to be talking a little bit about both of these books today and really going to dive into the psychological impact especially in relation to The Legal Killer, that Elliot, this book had on your readers, including me, but also on you. So thank you for being here.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here. Excited.
All right. So let's just start broadly. Tell me a little bit about your motivations, your passions. What really drives you when you're thinking about what you're about to write or what you want to write?
Generally, most of my motivations come from something that strikes me emotionally or makes me feel upset. Generally, something that if something upsets me or something causes me to get angry or even infuriated, a lot of times that drives my writing. So writing almost serves as a cathartic way of me kind of letting out my anger and my thoughts on something that has occurred. And maybe in some ways it's a little bit being vengeful in a way, but it's that is generally my motivation. So when I think of a storyline, or if I think of a topic, it's usually something that I've come across, that I've read, a national news story, something that's happened locally, whatever it might be. Politics obviously are always something that gets people upset. I think that's what's going on a lot these days with our very divided society, and these various touchy issues and that affect me emotionally is what drives my writing.
Okay, and having read The Arlington Orders, there's a lot of historical fiction there, but as I read through The Legal Killer, I had a much, I think, deeper social epiphany, a social awareness, an awakening, if you will. Can you talk a little bit about how that might also be driving or drove that story in particular?
Oh, without question. In fact, when you say an epiphany, it really was doing the research for that story. Basically, that started out as something that was about a story I read about a congressman up in Alaska who was prosecuted by the U.S. Attorney's Office for, I can't remember the exact crimes now, but it was for various crimes. It was fraud was one of them. And the prosecutors knew that he was innocent and withheld evidence. And even though eventually he was exonerated, it ruined his life, it ruined the lives of his children, his wife, everybody. And there was no accountability. And so when I read that story, it kind of emotionally touched me. How is it possible that they can do this type of stuff? They could basically destroy a person's life and do something that is against the law, hiding evidence, and there's no repercussions whatsoever. So I started researching it, and the more I researched, the more I was disgusted. I basically consider the Department of Justice a criminal organization. I consider the people that work for it criminals. I had very mixed feelings when I was watching, anytime I watch hearings with Congress and things where you have FBI officials or U.S. attorneys or anybody from the DOJ, to me, it's like watching criminals go after other criminals. It's like watching, Charles Manson go after the Night Stalker. They're one and the same. So I have when I researched by talking to a lot of people involved in the system, people who basically grew a conscience basically and decided to kind of spill the beans on what they knew. And it really affected me. When I was interviewing these people, they were frightened to talk to me. They were because we could put their safety in jeopardy. Mm-hmm. We received threats. I received threats. It was something that was just shocking. And I guess if I were to put one word on it, it'd be disheartening, because these institutions that we believe in, that we grew up believing in, and to find out that they're basically nothing more than a facade for criminal activity.
So you received threats as in like death threats?
Oh yeah. Unfortunately, my social media guy was the one that got him, because a lot of people, they were sending him to him because he was the one handling my social media pages. But Yeah, and that's understandable because the information that I revealed and talked about, is something they do not want out there. And
Yeah.
so it is a very, very, as I said, it's a very touchy issue. And again, it's still, even when I talk about it now, I get angry, even though I've written the book and got it out of my system, it still filters in. Every time I see something going on, which is quite often, if you watch the news at all, you read the news, whatever, there's always something about the DOJ. And I think a lot of that's coming to light. There's been a lot of, I guess, and I feel vindicated in some ways because a lot of what I talk about in the book, we're hearing about in the news today. Hiding evidence, I can't say the word, politicization of the process, using the DOJ as a weapon, the corruption of the U.S. Attorney's Office, which is a whole, I could write another book on just them alone. So it is pretty, it's a pretty amazing thing to look at. And as I said, very disheartening.
Yeah, and again, as I read the book, I felt like I was becoming educated. My social awareness of how the system worked, especially when you started to talk about the privatization of federal prisons. Could you touch on that just a little for our listeners today?
Sure. I think people have a big misconception of what the private prison industry is. I mean, most people, when they hear the word private prison industry, they think of the buildings and the bars. They say, okay, well, this is companies that build the prisons and they, build the cells and they stock them with guards, and that's what it is. That does exist, but that is just a drop in the bucket. The private prison industry is involved in every prison, whether it is federal or state owned, and it's because all the goods and services that are needed to run a prison, the bedding, the clothing, food contracts, sanitation contracts, all these huge contracts that are worth hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars are all bid on by the private prison industry. Commissary contracts in the federal prisons alone, the commissary contracts are worth $500 million just on that alone. It's extraordinary the amount of money that they spend on these prisons. And the other thing is that we never look at is something that the private prison industry has recently got involved in, which was the halfway houses. The halfway houses used to be privately owned. The private prison industry was able to choke them out by convincing the federal government not to send them people to the halfway house. So the halfway houses, the privately owned ones, had no prisoners, thus they got, or no, tenants at all. So they had no money coming in, and they did that purposely to wipe them off so they could start their own. It is a extremely corrupt, and it is that's what the private prison industry is. It's every aspect of a prison, not just the buildings and the bars. That's just a drop in the bucket.
It's calculated.
Yes, very calculated.
Okay. So I would imagine, having received death threats and all sorts of threats to yourself, to your family, was there ever a moment where you began to weigh out the pros and cons of, should I even write this book? And you did, so obviously you went with yes. And when you chose that direction, tell me a little bit about why.
I guess when I started writing the book, I didn't realize how deep the corruption was. I didn't understand it. And as these, different threats or dangers came in, I guess you'd call them, there was a part of me, I'd be lying to say, oh, I didn't think twice about it. I did. But I felt that, I had put so much work into this book, and I felt that it was something that needed to be written, and it was something that needed to be told. And there was, to be honest with you, I never really doubted or putting the book out there. I knew I was going to do it. But it, in terms of the thought of, I could be in danger or something of that nature. Yeah, that thought came to mind. I think as I was writing the book and I got closer to finishing, I got more nervous. I don't know why. Once it was published, it was kind of like this, I could breathe again. But I guess and you've read the story, as the intensity of the story, a lot of that intensity that happens in the story was what was actually going on with me. I was feeling that same intensity, but on the outside. So I kind of incorporated my emotion into the story. And that's why, as the tension grows in the book, what you're reading basically is the tension growing in the author, because of what I was experiencing at the time.
Okay, so that leads me to a question then about character development, because you've mentioned yourself several times and how you are being perhaps reflected emotionally, behaviorally, at different stages of your book. Does your own life somehow impact your characters?
Oh, without question. Not just my life, but the lives of other people I know and meet. So I incorporate people into, I incorporate basically my life and other people's lives into the characters I write. So for my main character, Des Cook, he's a person who suffers from anxiety. He suffers from panic attacks. That's something I suffered from. I have struggled with anxiety for a long time, still do to this day, and I've had to get help for it because it's something that I used to see as a curse, but now I kind of see it as a blessing and a curse because I can use it into forming characters I think that are a little bit more human, a little bit more believable. I think a lot of the type of suspense thrillers that you read, they always involve this super spy or this person that is driven and they don't have any of these little types of human character flaws that a lot of people we know have. And my character Desmond is not like that at all. He does suffer from anxiety. He suffers from PTSD. So he has these problems, depression. I also tend to write a lot of my character into the villains. And a lot of people say, do you write yourself into do you see yourself in Des Cook? And my answer generally is no. I see myself usually in the villains. One of my villains from the Arlington Orders is he's just known as the Judge, and he is obsessive compulsive. And I've had that kind of a touch of that, where I become very obsessive about my work, and I write those into characters. So, and that's why I also try to make my protagonists are not completely good and my antagonists are not completely bad. They're a mix of both, which is, I think, more what real life is like. We all have good and bad in each of us.
So have you learned anything about yourself as you developed characters or written books?
Yeah, I think I'm tougher than I thought I was. When I wrote these books, I didn't really see myself as being this tough individual, and I don't see myself as a tough guy, but I mean, in terms of being able to weather adversity, writing books, there's a lot of things that happen in terms of trying to complete it that I think if someone asked me if I had faced it previously to starting the book, I would have said, I would have probably thrown it away and given up. But I actually persevered and finished it. So I learned that and actually tougher than I thought I was, that I can get through adversity and be okay on the other side. And that was nice to learn because before I would have doubted that maybe.
Okay, excellent. And I did notice there's like sort of a slight difference between the two books. Arlington Orders, very historical fiction based, a lot of fun, lots of plot twists. But when I got to the Legal Killers, boy, did the pace, it was like being on a roller coaster ride. Do you think that, are you moving in a certain direction with style, or, what's next?
Oh, there's no question. The Arlington Orders was kind of my first dabble into trying to do really a research-laden book. And so I think the pace is more methodical and it's a gradual buildup. And, the Legal Killer was something that was basically poured out of me from an emotional standpoint. It was actually easier to write than the Arlington Orders was very difficult to write because it was, it didn't touch on me as much emotionally as the Legal Killer did. Whereas the Legal Killer, my anger kind of poured out onto the pages. Yeah, there's no question that my style of writing has changed certainly over the years, even from my early days of just writing magazine articles and website content. It's changed to where I am more willing to tackle some of these difficult issues. And so, like, for instance, the next book that I'm working on right now is dealing with the Palestinian and Israeli issue. And I have been, obviously, an extremely controversial issue, raises a lot of
absolutely.
Emotion. Yeah, a lot of emotion here in the US. And the other thing that I think the Legal Killer did for me is I am not neutral in my books. I don't ride the fence. I let people know what I feel, and I don't want to be neutral. And in my books, when I write from a definitive point of view. And my goal actually with all my books is that if I can make people upset, if I can make them angry, then I feel that I've done my job. I want people to get done with my book and start questioning their own philosophies, their own ideas about a certain issue or a certain problem. I want to challenge them. And I've had people email me and tell me that I really piss them off, basically, and that's fine. To me, that's the greatest compliment I can receive.
Okay, so do you have bigger aspirations for your books?
Well, yeah, we've been talking to, there's nothing in stone, but we've been talking with a few production companies, and hopefully that they're looking at both the Arlington Orders and the Legal Killer. Right now, COVID.
As in movies.
As in movies, yeah, something like hopefully something that would go into like a Netflix or Hulu thing. Right now, things have slowed down a little bit. We were excited about the process, then COVID hit and kind of, it not only pushed everything back, but pushed the production companies back because they couldn't make what they were currently working on. So we're kind of reinitiating the process right now. We're talking to a few people, and hopefully it works out. There are no guarantees. That's the one thing you learn very quickly. And I'm not involved in filmmaking or screenwriting or any of that aspect. So it's a very different world, and I have to be patient and kind of sit back and let my publicist take the lead and let him do the heavy lifting on this one. My job is to concentrate and hopefully finish this the next book I'm working on.
Excellent. Elliot, thank you so much for taking this time with me. It's been a great pleasure. Again, have known you all my life, but knowing you like this is really, really an honor for me. So thank you so much. And hopefully we'll be interviewing you again soon when your next big seller comes out.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate it. Had a great time.
Thanks, everybody. Bye-bye.